A very good morning and a warm welcome to our distinguished guests, venerable scholars, esteemed faculty members, and all the inquisitive minds gathered here today. We convene this morning not merely for a discussion, but for a journey into the shifting landscape of human thought. It is my distinct privilege, on behalf of Dr. Shripati Shastri, Research Institute of Social Sciences, to welcome you to today's symposium titled Ideological Metamorphosis of the Left, From Class to Culture. Let's begin this Sunday morning by a revitalizing huge round of applause. Thank you again for turning up in such huge numbers on a Sunday morning. And we'll be beginning now. The Shastri Institute, or the SSRISS, is a social science research institute based in Pune, dedicated to an objective and rigorous social science research. At a time when social science discourse is often shaped by dominating ideological narratives, Shastri Institute strives to examine social realities through an objective and independent perspective, while critically engaging with falsely propagated narratives in society. The core objective of our gathering today is to peel back these layers, to analyze the mechanics of this transformation, and to grasp its deeper ramifications for the fabric of our society and the future of our politics. And today's symposium reflects this commitment of the SSRISS. Through this symposium, we seek to examine the ideological shift happening in the broader Marxist school of thought, where class-based frameworks are being replaced by identity-centric and culture-centric narratives. This changing ideological base of the left inevitably impacts academia, public discourse, and contemporary affairs. The main focus of today's session will be to analyze and understand this transformation. Today's agenda includes 3 thematic deliberations with the broader theme. The first discussion will be led by Professor Kedar Naik, who will speak on the evolution of socialism. It will then be followed by Dr. Akshay Ranade, who will speak on the transmogrification of the left, an Indian experience. The last session on the politics of how the left, of the new left, will be led by Dr. Kaushik Gangopadhyay. Through these sessions, we hope to start a larger conversation on the broader ideological development within the left and its implication for politics and the society. So I once again welcome you all to today's symposium. And with that, I will now like to call upon Professor Kedar Naik to begin his session. But before that, sir, a little introduction of him first. So, to many of us, I think there is no introduction needed, but Professor Kedar Naik is an assistant professor of geopolitics at the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Pune, and an officer on special duty. With experience in political science, international relations, and environmental politics, he brings rich academic and teaching experience, including mentoring civil services aspirants and training intelligence and security officers. A published author and regular contributor to policy and media discussions. His research interests span geopolitics, political theory, environmental politics, history, and philosophy. And I personally pride myself to call him my mentor. So please welcome Professor Kedar Naik.
Thank you so much, Vansh, for such a kind introduction. So, as I say, let us begin at the beginning. And so when we are talking about Marx, so Marx claimed his theories to be scientific. And Marx called most of the other theories as ideologies. So basically camera obscura, the camera which distorts your relation with the truth. So to understand this, and Marx also calls his theory as dialectical materialism. He didn't use the word, but the name stuck. So what is this dialectics, when it emerges and how it emerges, and how it was essentially an ideological project and how it failed since the beginning, we would see in this session. I would keep it brief. I would want more questions. So rather than covering the depths of the Marxian analysis, I'll point out the major works and their follies. So to begin with, how does the dialectic starts? So generally, when they talk about fascism, they talk about the upheaval or the dislocation of European society or community caused by the First World War. But they do not talk about how Napoleonic and French Revolutionary Wars changed Europe forever. Dialectics as a methodology, if at all it can be called as a rigorous methodology of social sciences, finds its birth in the Napoleonic Wars and French Revolution. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, so a young German, Prussian to be precise. So Germany was, or most of the Germanic princes were humiliated by the French revolutionary armies. And so it made him introspect about the history of Germany, which at least through the Holy Roman Empire used to dominate the continental politics. So this humiliation motivated him to develop his own theories. And so what he called as dialectical historicism or dialectical idealism. So what were the chief arguments of Hegel? And what were the chief limitations of Hegel? Those limitations of Hegel are directly copied and directly reflected in the theories of Marx itself. So first of all, Hegel goes on to say that, basically this is a philosophy of history. He goes on to say that all the progress of humanity is progress of ideas. So basically the way you have thought and the different way of thoughts associating with reality have changed the human history forever. So he's not talking about the random thoughts that you are having. He's thinking that the world spirit, now we don't know what he actually means by world spirit. No one else does. Only Hegel could tell you that what that world spirit actually meant. But this world spirit progressively manifests itself in your social structures. So the first enunciation of this world spirit was, you could see it in the family structure. He calls it as the particular altruism. So that is, within the family, you have you are altruistic, you are selfless. Now, the further enunciation, so as it unfolds in the time, as it unfolds in the structures, so as you move on, then you have another social structure, which he calls as civil society, where you have universal egoism. So you are selfish towards each and every member of civil society. That's what he tells us. But now the thing is, why he used this particular word dialectics? Actually, the word was first used by Plato in his work Republic. And dialectics was just a method of Socrates by questioning the hypothesis or presuppositions of other people. So generally the concept is, if someone is asked, what is justice? Telling truth always. So Socrates would go on to question that concept and so on and so on and so on. So asking questions, and then by asking questions, reducing the falsifications within a given statement was called as dialectics, and that is said. Now, Hegel goes on to say that this dialectical is obviously it is of ideas, but it is of historical importance also. So history progresses not as it does not progress linearly, but history progresses through the battle and the contrast of the ideas. So now the first important idea here is, so that is particular altruism. So as I keep on mentioning, that first you have thesis which has some true elements and some wrong elements. Then you have antithesis, which also has some true elements and some wrong elements. And when thesis and antithesis combine, you come at synthesis, which has more true elements than both the thesis and antithesis combined. So dialectics comes to synthesis. That was the Hegel's argument. So in the first say, so in the structure of family, you have altruism, which is a good thing, but it is particular. It is only to the members of your family and it is not universal. Second thing is, like, good thing about the civil society is universality. So you treat each and everyone equally, and that is like that universality is something that needs to be celebrated. But it is the selfish behavior. So Hegel goes on to, as Rousseau pointed out, in civil society, you relate with other men just through what is the profit that you can seek out of those men. And there is no other relation between men and men that is generally dictated by the human empathy. So that's what his understanding was. So now these two ideas combine and you come at, so the particularism falls down and the egoism falls down, and you come at universal altruism. And when it is realized, according to Hegel, this is realized in the state. It is very abstract. So in the state or under the state citizenship, you treat each and everyone universally and equally, but at the same time, you treat them altruistically. And this was the ultimate realization of human history according to Hegel. He celebrated. Now, why he would celebrate state as much? Because at the time when Napoleon, so people go on to say that Napoleon changed the map of Europe like one man shakes a carpet. So because of this humiliation, there was no German state whatsoever. So he wanted a strong national German state. And hence he glorified the state in a manner he did. He went on to say that state is march of God on earth. He was equally critical of the French Revolution's abstract individualism, and because he goes on to say that if individual just thinks about himself, generally those are capricious ideas which are captured and which are further made the part of a social structure. So that was another problem. Now, so Hegel wrote this, which became immensely influential. His book Philosophy of Right was influenced at least 3 to 4 generations of philosophers, and they were like very staunch Hegelians or anti-Hegelians. And during the same time, the map of Europe was again changing. The Napoleonic Wars were now coming to their conclusion, and then the nation state were again emerging. This was the backdrop in which Karl Marx was born in Trier, Germany. Like most of the young Germans who were interested in philosophy, he ended up studying Hegel. But at the same time, you need to understand the family background of Marx also. So Karl Marx was born in a Jew family. His grandfather was a head, like he was the head rabbi of the synagogue of Trier, which was a huge synagogue. And then Karl Marx's father had studied law under the French regime. Now the thing is, after Napoleon's defeat, the Trier was handed back to the Prussian authorities. And in Prussian authorities, no Jew can hold any place of public prominence because a Jew cannot lord over a Christian. So the problem with Karl Marx's father was, though he had studied law with all his, all the deliberations and all the hard work that he had done, but now he cannot practice it. So the only option that Karl Marx's father had was to convert to Christianity. So he converted to Christianity. And when Karl Marx was born, his mother was still a Jew, and according to those theories, according to Jewish laws, the kid is still considered a Jew. So this was a forced conversion, and in my opinion, this denial of practice of faith, ritual, or religion to Marx's family made a huge impact on Marx's mindset, along with some other influences. Now, the main thing which influenced Marx to write in this way is let's call the elephant in the room, that is industrial revolution. Industrial revolution has changed the face of the earth or the way we live our lives for better or for worse. But at that time, mostly and for the most of the people, the worst outcomes of industrial revolution were out and clear. So first of all, industrial revolution started because many people were uprooted from villages in England. The steam machine was applied, and so first of all, they created huge supply of cheap labor which can be exploited at the will of the industrialist. So if you look at the typical day of a worker in 1830s and 1840s, you will have to get up at 4 because you do not have any job security. You will have to be the first few hundred ones or 200 ones to enter that gate so that you get your daily wage. And then you will have to work for 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 hours, as many hours. There is no limitation or regulation on the same. There is no lighting of the industry. There is no flooring. There is hardly any chimneys, or there is hardly any security measures. If you lose, if the accidents happen, industrial accidents are very common even today, and they were everyday happening or everyday news back at that time. And so if you lose a limb or a hand, it is your fault, and then you will be shifted to a poor house where you will have to wait for your death, and nothing else can be done. Similarly, so even people were poor before that, but at least they used to have sufficient space to live in. But now the Western European cities are exploding, and you do not have any places, you do not have enough places. So what they start is known as tenements, that is chawls. So they look at how the pigeons or how the chicken are packed in their pigeonholes. So they generally create such kind of tenements for the as the residences of human, and so which again further goes on to dehumanizing the human spirit. Karl Marx was writing in these times. Now, it was not that people were not responding or reacting against this. There were many people, Saint-Simon, Charles Fourier, and all of this. So they talked about the nationalization of the land or nationalization of the banks. Robert Owen started talking about the cooperative movement. Some people started talking about the creating communes, and so on and so on and so on and so on. Karl Marx was writing on this background. Okay, he was influenced by this industrial revolution. He was influenced by Hegel, and so in a crux, he was influenced by three things. That is the German continental philosophy, then the British economics, and French sociology. So these were the chief influences on Karl Marx. Now, what Karl Marx says? Karl Marx's first assumption was, so he starts saying that the introduction of private property within a given society starts all the exploitation. The moment, he also says that, first of all, he says, Hegel was standing on his head. I turned him upside down. He said that, Hegel said that the history is the continuous process of ideas. Marx went on to say that, no, history is the continuous development process of how the relations or forces of production manifest themselves. So what basically he means, so it is not the ideas which shape you, but it is the way you produce. The way your economic structure is, it changes and it structures everything, because that matters more than idea. Here itself, many people will find faults. Now, second thing is, when private property, the moment, let us not get into it, it is fiction, it is not theory at all. He says that then the private property was introduced. Now, the moment private property is introduced in picture, it creates two groups within the society. That is haves and have-nots. Basically, so, and he goes on to say that haves exist because they exploit the surplus labor of have-nots. So there is no other way for haves to exist but to exploit have-nots. So in the ancient times, you had basic agriculture, simple agriculture, and so these masters, the people who owned slaves, were the haves, and the slaves were have-nots. In the medieval times, the people, so you now have the big scale agriculture, so the landlords or the lords are the haves and the serfs are the have-nots. And in now present times, the industrialists are the haves and the workers are the have-nots. And he goes on to say that, see, so Owen or Saint-Simon, what they are trying to do, they are trying to pay more in wages. They are trying to change the working conditions of industries and all of this. Marx said that this is like taking I'm paraphrasing. This is like taking crocin for cancer. It is not going to change anything because the system is basically based on exploitation. Now here comes Marx as economist, or as I would like to call him, as a pseudo-economist. He puts forward his theory of surplus value. So what is his theory of value, or labor theory of value, on which he calls as theory of surplus value? So suppose that a tree exists middle in the desert. No one visits there. Does it have any economic cost or economic value? No. But now that tree is cut down, chopped down, and someone creates plywood out of it. Does it have value? Say $2,000. And now someone creates a table out of it. Does it have a value? Say 20,000 rupees. So Marx assumes that, taking from David Ricardo, another English economist, that the value is essentially created by the human labor. And now, no woodcutter or no carpenter gets the full price of that table because the lack of private property. So that they do not have enough funds to do all those things. So generally, some capitalist, some trader would buy that table at 2,000 rupees, will sell it at 20,000 rupees. And since the trader has the means or the property, he will end up exploiting 18,000 rupees of labor of that carpenter or that woodcutter. Prima facie, this seems very appealing. Prima facie, this seems very convincing. But once you start your own business, once you are actually working, you come to know that the value is not essentially created out of labor. Value is created through demand. Value is understood by risk-taking. So suppose that trader is taking immense risk of transporting that material, storing it, marketing it, displaying it. But Marxian economics has no understanding of it whatsoever. So if you are anti-Marxist, you would have to begin in economics itself. So basically, the whole economics on which Marx bases himself itself is very crude. And people claim him to be a philosopher. He would have done a better job in understanding his own limitations. Now moving on. So Marx goes on to say that this relation of exploitation will go on. But now things will change. Why? He says that capitalism is going to dig its own grave. Why? Because in order to prosper, capitalism will have to increase its profits. How it will increase profits? By reducing wages. And so, by reducing wages, capitalism will end up increasing its profits, and through its efficiency, it will create the huge pile of production. But at the same time, because of the reduction of the wages, people will be pauperized and they wouldn't be able to purchase the amount of production that capitalist has done. Again, bad economics. Which producer will create such kind of conditions in which people cannot buy those things? Generally, producers go out of their line. They have advertisements, they have teaser loans, they give you soft loans to buy, to induce you to buy more. But Marx was against any such kind of innovation. So here you will have like the mountain of production, but people without any purchasing power to buy it. And during the same time, workers will develop class consciousness. What is the class consciousness? The workers, you would identify, earlier they would identify themselves as Irish, Scottish, Welsh, from this town or that town, and they would fight amongst each other, a Protestant or Catholic or a Jew. But they would fight amongst each other. But slowly down the line, they would come to understand that they are being exploited not as an Irishman or a Scotsman or a Welsh guy. They are being exploited as workers. And so, their all other identity ascriptions will fall out, and they will identify themselves as only workers, and we are being exploited only as workers, and hence it will give rise to their class consciousness. And once they get class consciousness, there is no stopping to this industrial working class. they will go into revolution. Revolution has to be violent in all Marxist traditions. Okay? Because he goes on to violence is midwife of history, Karl Marx. So basically they will go for the violent revolution and they would seize the means of production, and through that which they will redistribute all the property. So they are not against like capitalism per se, but the private property they are against. And slowly down the line, dictatorship of proletariat will create the communism. And what is this communism? To each, so how you will work? To according to your will. जो मैं काम करना चाहूँ मैं करूँगा. And how you will get paid? To according to your need. To each according to his will, work according to his will, and to each according to his need. ऐसे उसने communism का picture paint किया. And what is the rosy picture? That you can herd the cattle in the morning, you can fish in the afternoon, you can write poetry in the evening and criticize. That is the communism, the ultimate goal of communism that was for Karl Marx. And he went on to say that this is scientific socialism. Why? Because I have discovered the laws of history, and that will essentially happen the same. Why the other theories are ideologies? Because they are legitimizing devices for the ruling structure. And why this is science? He goes on to say that, so for Marx, epistemology is self, like how we know what we know, itself is the inevitability of revolution. So Marx is saying that don't trust me, don't trust my theory. Wait for the impending revolution, and that revolution itself will prove that my socialism was scientific and the other guys were wrong. Okay, so that is the quick summation of what Marx argued for. Marx in the way went on to say that there will be polarization of class. So what were the predictions of Marx? He said that the profit margins would be hard to maintain, but they were exploding. He went on to say that the wages of workers will decline. They were increasing very sharply indeed. He went on to say that there will be no middle class whatsoever. But middle class started exploding, and by the arrival of 20th century, middle class became one of the most influential classes in European history. So all these predictions failed. And about the class consciousness, as we have seen in the Franco-Prussian War and then the Prusso-Austrian wars, that working classes, even the socialist ones, ended up taking the side of their countries rather than the working class across the borders. So there was no class consciousness which existed during the time of Marx itself. So if we check Marx on his own theories, he himself falters. And then he, according to his own judgment, we should call him an ideologue and not a theoretician. That is clear. Now coming back to dialectics, so what is thesis and what is antithesis? He says the class. How can you identify yourself as a class? Because even if you're a worker, you can be different level of worker. You can be a guy who is like in a managerial position or a very skilled worker. So there is no coherence within the working class itself. So basically, dialectics fails to be a rigorous methodology to understand social sciences because it is extremely vague and it is extremely ambiguous. That was a problem with Hegel, and that was a problem with Marx. Now, Marx is dead in 1883 and revolution is not coming. Now, how to change this? So Engels, his best friend and his basically financer, ends up writing two books, Anti-Doering and Origin of State, Family and Private Property. And now he's shifting tacks. He comes to know that first of all, he goes to understand that the family structure is an immensely important structure which gives homogeneity, harmony and continuity not only to family and individuals but to any social structure. Wherever you have good working families, you will essentially have harmonious societies. So now they start attacking the family structure itself. I would quote Engels here in his 1894 book, The Origin of Family, Private Property and the State. He goes on to say that the bourgeois marriage is legalized prostitution. And he goes on to say that, so you need to come out of such kind of monogamous relations. So now the Marxists are shifting tacks. And they will be writing more about culture. They will be writing more about family because they come to understand that the economic, revolution is not happening. Now, the next guy in this line to change the tax was Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, a Russian Marxist. Now, what Russia has to do about Marxism? If you read Marx himself, Marx goes on to say that there would be no revolution in Russia. Revolution will essentially happen in advanced industrialist economies because the capitalism has played its role. So basically, either in France, United Kingdom, or hardly Netherlands. He used to consider even Prussia or Germany as a backward land. Leave Russia. So there was no chance of revolution. Now Lenin is trying to, so obviously he was brainwashed and now he is trying to create the revolution in Russia. Okay? Russia did not have proletariat or the working class as its majority. Now how to do this? So in 1902, he ends up writing a book named as What is to be Done. It's basically a pamphlet. But that is, I think that is more important a reading material than any of the Marx's writing, because this is where he gives you the structure of communist parties. Marx never ever, he said that the emancipation of working class is the task of workers themselves. No one is going to teach them anything. But Lenin goes on to say that workers do not get any kind of class consciousness. They end up getting only trade union consciousness. Hence, you need some enlightened people who are aware of these processes of dialectical materialism and would teach, would elaborate upon the principles of dialectical materialism to the working class, and that will be the Communist Party. Now, what will be the structure of this Communist Party? He goes on to say that it should essentially be underground. Remember that Marx was also had his connections with underground, but after 1850s, because of some threats that he received, basically he was not brave enough or courageous enough, he severed all the ties from the underground. But then if you were in Russia, you had no option because there were no parties, there were no freedom of speech and expression, and hence Lenin actually created an underground party. How is this party going to be? It is going to be a secret party. It is going to be a revolutionary party. You should be perfecting the subversive tactics. Hence, Molotov cocktail, the name itself comes from another Russian commissar who was part of party since early times. Subversion is essentially part. It is intelligent, so this party will work as vanguard of the proletariat. They will educate the masses, but then Lenin differentiates between the consciousness and spontaneity. For Marx, revolution would have been spontaneous. Lenin goes on to say that it cannot be spontaneous because people, even if they revolt, they will go for bread and butter issues. Ki hamari price badhao. Bas, that's it. And they will go home if the salaries are increased, and that's it. So they wouldn't go for what one can say, vyavastha parivartan, or the systemic or structural change. The only vanguard party will be able to do that. Now, what should be the structure of this party? So he goes on to say, as I mentioned, that it will be secret, it will be subversive. Now, he was in opposition with Mensheviks. So Mensheviks and Bolsheviks. So Mensheviks were more about we should involve organically the trade unions. And then we should be associating with their cause. And if we are organizing or if we are associating with the different trade unions and different units at different levels, we'll have to be essentially decentralized. Because one union is in Petersburg, another is in Kazan, another is in Moscow. And so we'll have to be essentially decentralized. Lenin said, no. He was like, so first of all, he has least amount of trust in the people's capability to go for the communist revolution. So he coins his own word, democratic centralism. What is this democratic centralism? So basically, you will have like basic structure, sale, cadre, sale, province, the district, province, and the center level. You can discuss the things on which party is yet to take decision. But once party takes decision, no discussion will be on there, and every member of the party will implement it as if their own decision. A Russian social philosopher at that time wrote that, so someday the organization of party will replace the party. First, the party will replace the proletariat. the organization of the party will replace the party, the central committee of the organization will replace the organization, and finally, a dictator will replace the central committee. This guy was Trotsky, and they were yet to make the alliance. They made their alliance in 1917. But Trotsky himself was immensely critical of the organization of the Bolshevik party and the structures it had. And what he had predicted happened like all across the worldwide, and it is essentially copied. So the Cuban Communist Party was created in the same fashion, the Chinese Communist Party was created in the same fashion, and the Korean Communist Party was created in the same fashion. And those parties are essentially ruled by dictators. Lenin, Stalin, some interregnum. And then you ask, Putin is not running the party, but anyways, it goes on to define the way. Similar, Chairman Mao. And then some people went on to say that, see, look at the democracy after Mao, they have such kind of democracy. You have Xi Jinping. You have Fidel Castro. They are more nepotistic than most of the provincial parties in India. So it is going to be Fidel, Raul, and that is the case. And if you have to look at the nepotism, look at the Kim family of North Korea. So it is not a happenstance. It is basically the structural design that was given by it. I guess I'll have to hurry up, so I'll not talk much about Lenin. So first of all, this is democratic centralism. And the third thing, if Marx accepted violence, Lenin mainstreamed it. And Lenin used immense words. So there are only three times the word terror is associated with the state. That is, the first is the reign of terror in French Revolution, which was a left-leaning revolution. Second is the Red Terror of 1918, again a Communist Party led. And third is the Great Terror after a great terrorist, that is Stalin, again associated with the Communist Party state or the left-leaning. Now that's what he said. Again, the third guy who developed this logic to the fullest was Chairman Mao. Now Mao understood the tactical alliance that Lenin was making with the peasantry. But so Lenin ne kya kiya tha? He took the support of peasantry, he handed over them some of the land parcels, and it was the Stalin who went for the collectivization. Mao said that, looking at least Mao was original thinker, unlike Lenin. In Lenin, Marxism, rather than even an ideology, it becomes a religion. And if you do not believe in what Lenin or the party has to say, you will face essentially blasphemy laws. Sartan se juda. So basically, and they were very efficient in doing that. And so similar is the case with the Mao. Mao talks about the original thinker, so he talks about the many contradictions. I'll not go into the depths of it. But what Mao changed is, Mao theoretically made peasantry as a class which will bring the revolution. Which is a heresy in Marxism, because if such kind of concept can be changed easily, then why Marx can be called socialist at all? That is there. Mao talks of permanent revolution. Mao starts a cultural revolution. I'll not get into depths of it. And unlike Marx, so Marx ने कहा कि क्रांति आएगी. कैसे आएगी? कुछ नहीं, वो अपना आप देख लोगे. Marx बोला dictatorship proletariat लाओगे. वो क्या करेगा? कुछ वो आप देख लेना. So basically that shows the lack of responsibility on a social philosopher. Like, he was very insightful, but he wouldn't understand or did not have the foresight to understand the downsides of what he is philosophizing. But Mao gives you a little red book, which is nothing short of a manual how to create a subversive revolution. It includes many things. And those things are essentially copied by Naxals in India. First of all, you start with peasants. You associate yourself with the peasant cause, and then you take their support. But as again, Lenin went on to say that, see, You use masses not to come to the conclusion for yourself. You listen to masses so that you can induce masses to do what you wanted to do. I'll give you an example. So these peasants, they supported communism. In 1930, 6 million Ukrainian landholders died because of the Stalin's collectivization policy. The greatest of the famines were introduced in Russia. And similar was the case in China, where millions and millions perished because of the collectivization efforts of Chairman Mao. 20th century is a century of the terrorist, fanatical murderers. And still Adolf Hitler stands third. Second number is Joseph Stalin, and first number is Chairman Mao. And these are the policies being implicated. In India also, you can see that. The most of the peasant issues, so CPI would take it up, would amplify it, and would show that we are on the sides of the peasants. But not for long. For them, it is a tactical alliance in which they will severize the moment the communists get power, and they still believe on the dictatorship of party and not the proletariat. I guess I can go on, but I'll have to stop. If you have any questions, so we can take a few. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kedar ji, for such fascinating take on the subject. The way he explained how communism as an ideology or the leftist ideology began and how it traveled across the world in different forms was truly fascinating and enriching.